Professor Zethkara stood at the front of her classroom aboard the Galactic Academic Station Kepler-7, her crystalline features catching the soft blue light that filtered through the massive viewing windows. Outside, the peaceful stars of the neutral zone twinkled like scattered diamonds against the black of space. She had taught advanced xenobiology for over 2 decades, and in all that time, she had never faced a situation quite like this one. The classroom was filled with the galaxy's brightest young minds. The insectoid Threx students clustered together in their usual formation, their chitinous shells gleaming under the artificial lights as they communicated through rapid clicking sounds and subtle antenna movements. Near the back, 3 luminari floated in their specialized chairs, their translucent bodies pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that indicated peaceful concentration. The aquatic deepwater cetaceans occupied their environmental suits, their large eyes peering through the transparent aluminum viewing ports with the calm intelligence their species was famous for. Throughout the galaxy, all of these students came from civilized worlds, places where evolution had favored cooperation and intellectual development over physical prowess. Their homeworlds were garden planets with stable climates, abundant resources, and natural harmony between species. Violence was a concept they understood only from historical records and theoretical discussions. Zethkara cleared her throat, producing a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The students turned their attention to her, sensing through their various methods of perception that she had something important to announce. She had received the official notification only that morning, and even now, hours later, she still found it difficult to believe. "Students," she began, her telepathic abilities allowing her to sense the immediate spike of curiosity from those species capable of such communication. "I have received word from the Academy administration that we will be joined by a new student today. This student comes from a rather unusual background, and I want you all to remember that our institution prides itself on academic excellence and interspecies cooperation regardless of origin." The Threx students clicked among themselves with increased frequency, their equivalent of excited whispering. The luminari brightened slightly, their natural curiosity overriding their usual calm demeanor. Even the stoic cetaceans shifted in their suits, their massive forms creating gentle ripples in the water that surrounded them. "Our new student," Zethkara continued, trying to keep her voice steady, "is human. He comes from the planet Earth, which is classified as a Class 12 death world." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The Threx students' clicking became a harsh cacophony of alarm signals, their bodies instinctively clustering tighter together in a defensive formation that their ancestors had used when faced with predators. The luminari dimmed to barely visible glows, their natural response when trying to hide from danger. Even the usually composed cetaceans began producing the low-frequency calls that indicated distress. Zethkara raised one of her delicate, crystal-like hands for silence. "I understand your concerns," she said, though her own mind was filled with doubt. Class 12 death worlds were legendary throughout the galaxy for their hostility to life. The atmospheric pressure on Earth was enough to crush most species. The gravity would flatten a luminari into paste, and the weather patterns alone were classified as extreme natural disasters by galactic standards. What kind of creature could evolve in such conditions? "However," she continued, "this human has been accepted into our program based on exceptional academic merit. The Academy administration has assured me that all necessary safety protocols have been implemented." A young Threx named Clix raised one of his foreclaws tentatively. "Professor, forgive me, but are we certain this is wise? Deathworld species are known to be aggressive predators. My family's historical records speak of encounters with such creatures in the early days of galactic exploration." Before Zethkara could respond, the classroom door slid open with a soft hiss. Every student in the room turned to look, and what they saw confirmed their worst fears. Jake Morrison stepped into the classroom with the easy confidence of a creature that had never known what it meant to be prey. He stood nearly 6 feet tall, his frame broader and more muscled than any sapient species the students had encountered. His bones were dense and heavy, his skin thick and scarred from a lifetime on a world that seemed determined to kill its inhabitants. Most disturbing of all were his eyes, positioned at the front of his skull like those of a predator, capable of the binocular vision that hunters used to track and kill their prey. Jake looked around the classroom with what he intended as a friendly smile, but to the assembled students, the sight of his omnivore teeth was terrifying. Those teeth were designed for tearing meat, for consuming other living beings. The fact that humans were omnivores rather than pure carnivores was little comfort to creatures whose species had evolved as prey animals. "Sorry I'm late," Jake said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Even his vocal cords were different, capable of producing sounds at volumes that would damage the sensitive hearing of several species present. "Had some trouble finding the right classroom. This place is bigger than most cities back home." He moved toward an empty seat, and the students nearest to his path instinctively shrank away. His walk was the confident stride of an apex predator, each step placed with the unconscious precision of a hunter. The reinforced chair groaned slightly under his weight as he sat down, a reminder that his bones were nearly twice as dense as those of any other species in the room. Jake pulled out what appeared to be primitive paper notebooks and metal writing implements, causing another wave of concern among the students. While they were accustomed to holographic displays and neural interfaces, this human was using tools that looked like they had been crafted by barely civilized beings. The metal stylus in his hand could easily be used as a weapon, and his casual handling of it suggested a familiarity with tools that could cause harm. "Now then," Professor Zethkara said, her voice slightly strained as she tried to maintain academic normalcy, "let us begin today's lecture on basic interspecies physiology. As you know, most sapient life in the galaxy has evolved under relatively similar conditions. Stable climates, moderate gravity, and peaceful evolutionary pressures have shaped our various species in predictable ways." She activated the holographic display, showing the comparative anatomy of several common galactic species. "As you can see, most of us share certain characteristics: relatively fragile bone structures, efficient metabolisms adapted to abundant resources, and sensory organs designed for communication and cooperation rather than survival in hostile environments." Jake raised his hand, the gesture causing several nearby students to flinch. "Professor, if I may," he said politely, "I think there might be some interesting contrasts to explore. Humans have evolved quite differently due to our environmental pressures." "Of course," Zethkara replied, though every instinct told her this was a mistake. "Please share your perspective." Jake stood up, his full height causing even more alarm among the students. "Well, for starters, human bones are much denser than what you've shown here. We've had to develop skeletal systems that can handle high gravity and frequent physical trauma. Our muscle density is also much higher because our world requires constant physical exertion just to survive." He gestured casually to his own body, unaware that his movements were being interpreted as threat displays. "Our healing factor is also quite different. What would be fatal injuries to most species are things we typically just walk off. Broken bones heal in weeks, cuts and bruises disappear in days, and we've developed pain tolerance that lets us function even when seriously injured." The classroom fell silent except for the nervous clicking of Threx students and the barely audible whimpers from the Luminari. Jake seemed oblivious to the fear he was inspiring, continuing his explanation with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested in academic discussion. "Our sensory systems are also adapted for a hostile environment," he continued. "Binocular vision for depth perception and tracking moving objects, enhanced hearing capable of detecting threats from long distances, and a sense of smell that can identify dangers and resources from miles away." Professor Zethkara realized that what Jake intended as educational sharing was being received as a detailed description of predatory capabilities. His casual mention of healing from injuries that would kill other species, his discussion of enhanced senses designed for hunting, and his obvious physical superiority were confirming every evolutionary fear programmed into her students' genetic memory. Yet as terrifying as Jake appeared, there was something else about him that puzzled her. Despite his predatory appearance and his casual discussion of violence and survival, he seemed genuinely friendly and intellectually curious. His questions were thoughtful, his attention to the lecture material was focused, and his desire to contribute to the discussion appeared to be motivated by academic interest rather than dominance or aggression. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to Deathworld species than the galaxy assumed. Perhaps these creatures, forged in the crucible of hostile worlds, had developed not just physical superiority. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison arrived at the Galactic Academic Station, and the whispers had only grown louder. Students from across the station spoke in hushed tones about the human Deathworlder who sat in advanced xenobiology class, taking notes with primitive metal tools while everyone else accessed holographic data streams and neural interfaces. The academic staff found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Never before had they hosted a student from a Class 12 Deathworld, and Jake's presence was creating ripple effects throughout their carefully structured educational environment. Professor Zethkara had begun scheduling her classes around reinforced furniture delivery schedules, while other instructors were quietly requesting hazard pay adjustments. Yet despite the fear and whispers, something remarkable was beginning to emerge from Jake's academic performance. The first hint came during a routine examination in theoretical physics, administered by Dr. Myron Quell, a deepwater cetacean, whose species was renowned for their mathematical genius and collective processing abilities. The examination chamber was filled with the usual array of species-specific testing equipment. The Threx students had linked their individual minds into a collective processing network, their antennae touching to create a shared computational matrix that could solve complex equations through distributed thinking. The Luminari students were accessing their species' vast accumulated knowledge through bioluminescent data streams that connected them to their homeworld's central database. The cetacean students were using their natural echolocation abilities enhanced by quantum resonance chambers to visualize multidimensional mathematical relationships. Jake sat alone at his reinforced desk with nothing but paper, a metal stylus, and what appeared to be a simple mechanical calculator that looked ancient by galactic standards. Dr. Quell watched through the examination chamber's observation window, her massive form suspended in her aquatic environment suit. Her large eyes focused on the human with a mixture of scientific curiosity and genuine concern. The examination questions were designed to test advanced understanding of quantum mechanics, multidimensional calculus, and spacetime manipulation theory. These were concepts that required either sophisticated technological assistance or the collective intelligence, capabilities that most advanced species had evolved over millions of years. Jake began working immediately, his primitive metal stylus moving across the paper in rapid strokes. Unlike the other students who were accessing vast databases and sharing computational resources, he appeared to be working entirely from his own biological neural pathways. Dr. Quell found this fascinating from a xenobiological perspective, but she was prepared to be sympathetic when grading his results. When the examination period ended, Jake stood up and submitted his papers to the automated collection system. The other students completed their submissions through their various technological interfaces, their answers automatically formatted and processed through advanced analytical systems. Dr. Quell began reviewing the results that evening, starting with the technologically assisted submissions that she expected to be the strongest. The Threx Collective had produced mathematically elegant solutions with perfect precision, exactly what she expected from a species that could share computational resources across multiple individuals. The Luminari students had accessed historical solutions from their species' greatest mathematicians, adapting classical approaches to the contemporary problems with characteristic efficiency. Then she opened Jake's submission, prepared to find the struggling attempts of a primitive mind working without technological assistance. What she discovered left her staring at the papers for nearly an hour, checking and rechecking her evaluation criteria. Jake had scored in the top 5% of the class. More incredibly, his methods were completely unique. Where other students had relied on established mathematical proofs and collective processing power, Jake had approached each problem from first principles. His solutions were rough around the edges, filled with approximations and intuitive leaps that made Dr. Quell's precise mathematical mind cringe. But they were fundamentally correct. When she called him to her office the next day, Jake arrived. With his usual casual confidence, seemingly unaware that he had accomplished something that should have been impossible. "Jake," Dr. Quell began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that citations use to indicate serious discussion, "I need to understand how you approached the quantum mechanics problems on yesterday's examination." Jake settled into the reinforced chair across from her desk, his predator eyes showing genuine interest rather than the defensive concern she might have expected. "Which problem specifically?" he asked. "The multidimensional wave function stuff or the space-time? Curvature calculations?" "All of them," Dr. Quell replied. "Your solutions are correct, but your methods are unlike anything in our academic databases. You solved complex equations without technological assistance, without collective processing, and without accessing historical mathematical frameworks." Jake shrugged, a gesture that caused his broad shoulders to move in a way that reminded Dr. Quell uncomfortably of his predatory nature. "I just thought about them until they made sense," he said simply. "Back on Earth, we call it intuition and educated guessing, but these are advanced theoretical concepts," Dr. Quell protested. "The mathematical relationships involved require precise calculation and comprehensive understanding of quantum field theory." "Do they really, though?" Jake asked, and something in his tone suggested he was genuinely curious rather than challenging. "Pro authority. I mean, the math is just a way of describing relationships between things, right? If you can visualize how the relationships work, the numbers kind of follow naturally." Dr. Quell found herself leaning forward in her environmental suit, her scientific curiosity overriding her evolutionary caution. "Show me what you mean." Jake pulled out one of his primitive paper notebooks and began sketching rough diagrams with his metal stylus. "Okay, take quantum wave functions," he said, drawing what looked like crude waves and circles. "Everyone talks about them like they're these mysterious mathematical abstractions, but they're really just describing how energy moves through space, right?" His drawings were simple, almost childlike compared to the sophisticated holographic models that other students used. But as he continued explaining, Dr. Quell began to see something remarkable. Jake wasn't memorizing mathematical formulas or accessing computational databases. He was genuinely understanding the underlying physical principles and deriving the mathematics from that understanding. "On Earth, we deal with wave patterns all the time," Jake continued, adding more rough sketches to his diagram. "Ocean waves, sound waves, electromagnetic radiation from our sun. You learn to read patterns instinctively when your survival depends on predicting how energy is going to move through your environment." Dr. Quell realized that Jake was describing a form of intuitive physics that her species had never needed to develop. Cetaceans lived in stable aquatic environments where energy patterns were predictable and cooperative. Intelligence could solve complex problems through collective analysis. Jake came from a world where individual organisms had to make split-second decisions about complex energy relationships or die. The revelation continued during their next group assignment. Professor Zethkara had assigned a project on evolutionary adaptation strategies, requiring students to analyze survival mechanisms across different environmental classifications. Jake was reluctantly paired with Lyra, a young luminary who had initially refused to work with what she considered a dangerous primitive. Lyra approached the project with the methodical precision her species was known for, accessing comprehensive databases of biological information and cross-referencing adaptation strategies with environmental variables. Her holographic displays showed elegant charts and graphs detailing millions of years of evolutionary development across thousands of species. Jake sat beside her with his paper notebooks, sketching rough drawings of creatures and environments, while asking questions that seemed almost naive in their simplicity. "Why did the Kepler-9 herbivores develop 6 legs instead of 4? He asked, looking at one of Lyra's detailed evolutionary charts. The database indicates that additional limbs provided enhanced stability on their homeworld's uneven terrain, Lyra replied, her bioluminescent patterns showing mild irritation at the interruption. But why 6 instead of 8, or just bigger? Feet on 4 legs? Jake continued, sketching a rough drawing of the creature in question. I mean, more legs means more energy expenditure, more things that can get injured, more complex neural control systems. Lyra paused in her database queries, her natural glow flickering as she considered the question. The evolutionary databases provided detailed information about what had happened, but they rarely addressed why alternative solutions had not been selected. Jake continued sketching and asking questions, his crude drawing somehow making the complex evolutionary relationships clearer than Lyra's sophisticated data displays. He approached each species not as a collection of statistical data, but as a solution to survival problems in specific environments. Look at this, he said, showing Lyra a simple diagram of predator-prey relationships. Your database says, the emergency klaxons throughout Galactic Academic Station Kepler-7 began their haunting wail at 0347 station time, jolting students and faculty from their sleep with the distinctive pattern that indicated an imminent threat to sapient life. Jake Morrison had been awake anyway, studying for his advanced theoretical physics examination while most of the station slept, when the alarm system activated and bathed his quarters in the harsh red light of emergency status, emergency protocols. Throughout the galaxy were standardized for good reason. Within minutes of the alarm activation, all senior faculty and graduate students were summoned to the main conference center, where Station Commander Relix stood before a massive holographic display, showing real-time sensor data from across their sector of space. Commander Relix was a Corthony, a species known for their calm efficiency in crisis situations, and even he appeared visibly shaken as he addressed the assembled academics. His scaled features, normally composed and dignified, showed distress lines that indicated serious concern among his people. At 0334 station time, we received an automated distress signal from the research vessel Harmony of Knowledge, he announced, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that Corthony used to convey urgent information. The vessel was conducting deep space research near the Vortex Nebula when they suffered what appears to be cascading system failures. The holographic display shifted to show the research vessel's last known position, a small blinking icon near what looked like a swirling maelstrom of cosmic forces. The Vortex Nebula was a region of space notorious for its gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic interference, a kind of place where research was conducted remotely and with extreme caution. The Harmony of Knowledge is currently trapped in a decaying orbit around pulsar designated VX7739. Commander Relix continued, and audible gasps arose from the assembled academics. Pulsars were among the most dangerous objects in the galaxy, neutron stars that spun with incredible velocity while emitting deadly radiation and generating gravitational forces that could tear apart matter at the molecular level. The research vessel carries a crew of 47 beings representing 12 different species, including some of our own graduate students who were conducting fieldwork under Professor Thannery's guidance. Their primary systems are failing, their shields are operating at minimal capacity, and their orbit is degrading at an accelerating rate. Dr. Myron Quell raised one of her massive fins within her environmental suit. What is their current operational timeframe? She asked, using the clinical terminology that academics preferred when discussing life and death situations. Based on their last transmission and our orbital mechanics calculations, the Harmony of Knowledge has approximately 18 hours before tidal forces tear the vessel apart, Commander Relix replied grimly. The gravitational stress from the pulsar is already causing structural damage, and their life support systems are operating under severe strain. Professor Zethkara's crystalline features reflected the red emergency lighting as she considered the implications. What about conventional rescue operations? She asked. Surely the Galactic Rescue Service has protocols for such situations. The nearest rescue vessels are 72 hours away, Commander Relix answered. The Vortex Nebula is electromagnetic. Interference makes hyperspace travel impossible within a 50 light-year radius, and conventional propulsion cannot reach them in time. The conference room fell silent except for the nervous clicking of Threx faculty and the dim glow of worried Luminari professors. Everyone present understood the implications. 47 beings were going to die unless they could devise a solution, using only the resources available on an academic station. However, Commander Relix continued, Station Command has decided to convene our brightest theoretical minds to determine if any rescue scenario might be possible using our available resources. This station houses some of the galaxy's most advanced, thinking on physics, engineering, and spatial mechanics. Within hours, the station's main conference room had been converted into an emergency research center. Holographic displays showed detailed scans of the pulsar system, the trapped research vessel, and every piece of equipment available on the station. The galaxy's brightest academic minds worked frantically to devise solutions, their various species. Technologies creating a symphony of lights, sounds, and electromagnetic emanations as they processed their crisis. Dr. Thenvar, the station's leading expert on gravitational mechanics, stood before a massive three-dimensional display showing the pulsar system in exquisite detail. His calculations filled the air with holographic equations as he worked through potential rescue trajectories. The gravitational gradient around VX7739 creates a complex field of tidal forces, he explained to the assembled team. Any rescue vessel would need to precisely calculate approach vectors to avoid being torn apart by the same forces threatening the harmony of knowledge. Professor Yithka, a renowned expert in high-energy physics, contributed her own analysis through bioluminescent displays that mapped the pulsar's radiation emissions. The electromagnetic output from the neutron star creates additional complications. She noted, any rescue craft would need enhanced shielding to survive the radiation environment, and electronic systems would need to be hardened against quantum interference effects. The Threx Collective had linked their minds to create a distributed computational matrix, their combined processing power working through millions of potential scenarios. Their lead representative, Dr. Zixith, spoke for the collective consciousness as they presented their analysis. We have calculated 47,382 potential rescue trajectories using available station resources. The collective announced through Dr. Zixt H. All scenarios result in either mission failure due to insufficient approach velocity, structural failure of rescue craft due to tidal stress, or temporal failure due to insufficient time to execute complex maneuvers. Dr. Quell's massive form shifted within her environmental suit as she considered the mathematical constraints. The fundamental problem appears to be the precision required for successful navigation in the pulsar's gravitational field. Our calculations indicate that approach vectors must be accurate to within 0.001% to avoid catastrophic tidal forces, and our available propulsion systems lack the precision necessary for such exacting maneuvers. Hours passed as the academic team worked through increasingly desperate scenarios. Their holographic displays showed beautiful, sophisticated rescue plans that required technology they didn't possess, precision beyond current capabilities, or execution timeframes longer than the trapped researchers had available. Jake Morrison sat quietly in the back of the emergency session, ignored by the established academics who considered him a curiosity at best. While professors debated quantum field equations and space-time manipulation theory, he sketched rough diagrams in his paper notebook, occasionally looking up at the massive displays showing the pulsar system's complex dynamics. The breakthrough attempts became increasingly frantic as time passed. Professor Zethkara proposed using the station's research shuttles in formation to create a distributed rescue platform, but the calculations showed that the small craft would be destroyed by tidal forces long before reaching the trapped vessel. Dr. Kenvar suggested using controlled explosions to alter the research vessel's orbit, but the precision required was beyond anything they could achieve remotely. As the 6th hour of emergency planning passed, the academic team was forced to confront the possibility of failure. Their most elegant theoretical solutions required resources and precision that existed only in perfect laboratory conditions, not in the chaotic reality of a pulsar system where every calculation had to account for quantum uncertainties and gravitational anomalies that changed by the second. Dr. Quell's voice carried harmonics of defeat as she addressed the assembled team. "We have exhausted our conventional approaches," she announced. "While our theoretical models provide excellent solutions under ideal conditions, the practical requirements exceed our technological capabilities and available time frame." The conference room fell silent except for the continued emergency klaxons and the various sounds of distressed alien species. 47 beings were going to die, and the galaxy's brightest minds could do nothing but watch through their sophisticated sensors as the harmony of knowledge continued its inexorable spiral toward destruction. That was when Jake Morrison stood up and walked to the main holographic display, his movement causing the assembled academics to turn and stare at the Deathworld predator who had been sitting silently throughout their deliberations. "What if you're thinking about this wrong?" he said quietly, his voice cutting through the panicked discussions and frustrated calculations. His predator eyes focused on the swirling pattern of data representing the pulsar's rotation, and something in his expression suggested he was seeing relationships that the sophisticated computer models had missed. Professor Zethkara looked at him with a mixture of desperation and polite skepticism. "Jake, we appreciate any input, but this is a highly technical problem requiring advanced understanding of gravitational dynamics and quantum field theory." "I know," Jake replied, still studying the holographic display. "But sometimes the problem isn't that you." Jake Morrison's crude sketches seemed almost insulting compared to the sophisticated holographic models that filled the emergency conference room, but something about his simple spiral drawings was beginning to capture the attention of minds that had been thinking in purely theoretical terms for hours. The assembled academics stared at his rough diagrams with mixtures of scientific curiosity and barely concealed horror at what appeared to be a completely reckless approach to an impossibly complex problem. "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting," Professor Zethkara said carefully, her crystalline features reflecting the emergency lighting as she tried to process Jake's unconventional perspective. "The gravitational forces around VX 7739 are precisely calculated phenomena that require exact mathematical solutions." Jake continued sketching, his metal stylus moving across the paper with the confident strokes of someone who had suddenly found clarity in chaos. "See, that's where I think you're getting stuck," he said, adding more details to his hurricane analogy. "You're trying to calculate exact solutions for something that's constantly changing." He pointed to the real-time data streams showing the pulsar's rotation and the trapped research vessel's decaying orbit. "Look at those numbers. Every few seconds, the gravitational field shifts as the neutron star rotates the research vessel's position changes and the electromagnetic output fluctuates. By the time you calculate an exact solution, the conditions have already changed." Dr. Finvar, the station's leading expert on gravitational mechanics, leaned forward in his chair with obvious skepticism. "That is precisely why we require such precise calculations," he protested. "The margin for error is essentially zero. Any deviation from optimal trajectory results in catastrophic failure." "Does it, though?" Jake asked, and his tone carried the genuine curiosity that had become familiar to his classmates. "I mean, what if instead of fighting those changes you use them?" He began drawing what looked like a surfer riding a wave, the crude figure somehow managing to convey complex dynamic relationships through simple lines and curves. "Back on Earth, we've got people who surf ocean waves that are 30 feet high and moving at incredible speeds. They don't calculate the exact position of every water molecule. They read the patterns, feel the forces, and adapt in real time." The academic team exchanged glances that ranged from fascination to frank disbelief. Dr. Quell's massive form shifted within her environmental suit as she tried to process the implications of what Jake was suggesting. "You're proposing navigation based on intuition rather than calculation," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that cetaceans used when discussing concepts they found difficult to comprehend. "Not just intuition," Jake replied, his sketches becoming more detailed as he worked through his idea. Pattern recognition and adaptive response. Look, the pulsar rotates every 1.337 seconds in a predictable pattern. That creates gravitational waves that pulse outward like ripples on a pond. He drew a series of concentric circles with gaps between them, then added a small figure that appeared to be jumping from gap to gap. Instead of trying to calculate a perfect trajectory through changing conditions, you time your movements to ride the stable zones between the gravitational pulses. The Threx Collective had been following the discussion through their linked consciousness, and their representative Dr. Zixt H spoke for their distributed intelligence. The computational requirements for real-time adaptive navigation would exceed our available processing power by several orders of magnitude, the collective announced through their spokesperson. That's because you're still thinking about it as a computation problem, Jake said, his predator grin showing those terrifying omnivore teeth that had initially frightened his classmates. What if it's actually a timing and coordination problem instead? He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching what looked like a dance sequence, showing a small craft moving through the gravitational field in a series of carefully timed movements rather than a precisely calculated trajectory. The pulsar rotation is predictable, right? So you don't need to calculate every variable in real time. You just need to time your movements to hit the stable zones at the right moments, like jumping from one safe spot to the next. Professor Yithka, whose expertise in high-energy physics had contributed to their understanding of the pulsar's radiation output, studied Jake's crude diagrams with growing interest. You're suggesting a stochastic rather than deterministic approach, she said thoughtfully, using probability and timing rather than precise calculation? I guess, Jake replied, though he clearly wasn't familiar with the terminology she was using. I just know that sometimes the best way to deal with something that's trying to kill you is to work with it instead of against it. Commander Relix had been observing the discussion with the careful attention of someone who had actual experience with imperfect solutions under pressure. Unlike the assembled academics, he had commanded vessels in situations where theoretical perfection was a luxury that could get people killed. He stepped closer to examine Jake's rough sketches, his scaled features, showing the kind of interest that came from recognizing practical wisdom disguised as primitive thinking. Show me the timing intervals, Relix said simply, his military background allowing him to cut through academic debate and focus on actionable information. Jake looked up from the sketches with obvious relief at finding someone who wanted to discuss implementation rather than theory. The pulsar completes one rotation every 1.337 seconds, which means the gravitational pulse pattern repeats on that cycle. If you time your approach to hit the stable zones between pulses, you can essentially surf the gravitational waves toward the research vessel. He began adding timing notations to his crude drawings, showing windows of opportunity that lasted fractions of seconds but occurred in predictable patterns. The tricky part isn't the calculation, it's the execution. You need a pilot who can feel the gravitational forces and respond fast enough to ride the pattern instead of fighting it. Dr. Thinvar studied the timing data with obvious concern. The margin for error would be measured in milliseconds, he protested. Any deviation from optimal timing would result in the rescue craft being caught between gravitational pulses and torn apart by tidal forces. Yeah, Jake agreed cheerfully, apparently unbothered by the prospect of violent death. It's dangerous. But those people are going to die anyway if we don't try something. Commander Relix reviewed Jake's proposal with the clinical assessment of someone trained to evaluate risks against potential outcomes. The academic team had spent hours developing elegant solutions that required resources they didn't possess, and precision beyond their technological capabilities. Jake was proposing a solution that used available resources and accepted calculated risks, based on timing and skill rather than perfect information. What would you need for the rescue craft? Relix asked, his question causing several academics to stare at him in disbelief. Jake considered the question seriously, his rough sketches evolving into something that resembled actual mission planning, something fast and maneuverable with minimal automation. Most computer systems would try to calculate optimal trajectories instead of responding to real-time conditions. I want manual controls and direct feedback so I can feel what the gravitational field is doing to the ship. You're volunteering to pilot this mission? Dr. Quell asked, her massive form shifting in her environmental suit with what might have been concern or admiration. Well, yeah, Jake replied as if the question was obvious. I mean, I came up with the plan and I've got experience flying in unstable conditions. Back on Earth, I've piloted aircraft through hurricane systems and electrical storms. This is basically the same thing, just with gravity instead of wind. The comparison between atmospheric flight on a Deathworld and navigation around a pulsar struck the assembled academics as either brilliantly insightful or completely insane. Professor Zethkara found herself torn between her scientific curiosity about Jake's unconventional thinking and her genuine concern that they were about to send a student on what amounted to a suicide mission. The risk assessment indicates an extremely low probability of mission success, Dr. Zix announced, speaking for the Threk's collective consciousness that had been running probability calculations throughout the discussion. What's the probability of mission success if we don't try anything? Jake asked, and his question silenced the room. Commander Relix made the decision with the authority of someone trained to act under pressure. We'll modify one of the research shuttles according to your specifications, he told Jake. Reduced automation, enhanced manual controls, and simplified navigation systems. How long do you need to prepare? Give me 2 hours to study the gravitational field data and practice the timing sequences. Jake replied, his casual confidence causing visible distress among academics who understood exactly what forces he would be facing. And I'll need someone to walk me through the rescue vessel's docking systems so I know how to extract the crew once I get there. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation as the station's engineering teams worked to modify a research shuttle according to Jake's specifications. They stripped out the sophisticated automated. The modified shuttle carried Jake Morrison through space toward what every sophisticated computer model predicted would be his death. While half the galaxy's academic elite watched through sensor feeds from the safety of Galactic Academic Station, Kepler-7, the real-time telemetry showed his craft approaching the deadly gravitational field around pulsar VX 7739, where forces that could tear apart matter at the molecular level waited to test his theory about riding gravitational waves like an Earth surfer riding ocean swells. Professor Zethkara stood before the massive holographic display in the emergency command center, her crystalline features reflecting the harsh light of data streams that tracked every aspect of Jake's approach. Around her, the academic team watched with mixtures of scientific fascination and genuine horror as their crude diagrams and intuitive theories were put to the ultimate test in the unforgiving laboratory of real space. Approaching the outer gravitational boundary, Jake's voice crackled through the communication system, his tone calm and conversational despite the fact that he was voluntarily flying into conditions that would crush most known spacecraft. Starting to feel the pulsar's pull. It's actually kind of beautiful out here. Dr. Quell's massive form shifted within her environmental suit as she monitored the gravitational field measurements. The tidal forces he's experiencing should be causing structural stress to his shuttle, she murmured, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of scientific bewilderment. Yet his craft appears to be maintaining structural integrity. Commander. Relix checked the telemetry data with the clinical precision of someone trained to read battlefield conditions. Human bone density is approximately twice that of most galactic species, he noted. The gravitational forces that would incapacitate other pilots may simply register as uncomfortable pressure to him. On the display, Jake's shuttle began its descent into the gravitational maelstrom, and the academic observers watched in amazement as his flight path deviated dramatically from their carefully calculated trajectories. Instead of following the precise mathematical routes they had computed, Jake was improvising, his craft dancing through the gravitational field in patterns that seemed to violate physics but somehow kept working. He's not following our navigation protocols, Dr. Finvar observed, his voice tight with concern as he watched Jake's shuttle move through gravitational gradients that should have torn it apart. His trajectory appears to be completely random. It's not random, Professor Yithka said thoughtfully, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to indicate intense concentration. He's responding to real-time gravitational flux patterns that our computers can't calculate fast enough to predict. Jake's voice came through the communication system again, still maintaining that casual tone that seemed completely inappropriate for someone writing gravitational forces that could atomize his shuttle. Coming up on the first pulse window, he reported. Timing looks good. Here we go. The academic team watched in stunned silence as Jake's shuttle accelerated into what appeared to be empty space, then suddenly decelerated as invisible gravitational forces caught his craft and slingshot it forward at tremendous velocity. The maneuver looked impossible, defying every principle of safe navigation they had been taught. Yet somehow Jake emerged from the gravitational pulse zone with his shuttle intact and his trajectory perfectly aligned for the next stage of his approach. Incredible, Dr. Quell breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. He's using the pulsar's rotation to create gravitational assists that our computers never identified as viable navigation options, Jake continued. His descent toward the trapped research vessel Harmony of Knowledge, his shuttle riding the gravitational waves with fluid precision that made the academic observers' sophisticated calculations seem crude and clumsy by comparison. Every few seconds he would make minor course corrections that appeared minimal but proved to be perfectly timed to avoid gravitational shears that would have destroyed any craft following a predetermined flight path. Approaching the Harmony of Knowledge, Jake reported, his voice still carrying that calm confidence that had become familiar to his classmates. Their hull looks pretty beat up, but they're still in one piece, preparing for docking maneuvers. The rescue itself was a masterclass in controlled chaos that left the academic observers struggling to understand what they were witnessing. While they had expected precise mechanical operations based on carefully calculated procedures, Jake's approach was fluid and adaptive, responding to conditions that changed faster than any computer could process. Docking clamps engaged, Jake announced, and the sensor feeds showed. His shuttle locked onto the research vessel with the kind of precision that should have required computer-assisted navigation. Beginning crew transfer. First group is coming. Aboard now. Professor Zethkara found herself holding her breath as she watched the rescue operation unfold. The sophisticated sensor systems showed Jake coordinating the evacuation of 47 beings under conditions that would have overwhelmed most rescue specialists. Yet his voice remained calm and reassuring as he guided the terrified researchers aboard his modified shuttle. That's everyone, Jake reported after what felt like hours but had actually been only minutes. All crew members accounted for and secured. Beginning return journey. The return trip proved even more dramatic than the approach. With his shuttle heavily loaded with evacuated researchers, Jake had to navigate the same gravitational maze while managing the additional mass and the panic of passengers who had never experienced forces that their bodies weren't designed to survive. Easy there? Jake's voice could be heard reassuring his passengers over the communication system. I know this feels pretty rough, but we're riding the gravitational currents just like they're designed to work. Think of it as the galaxy's most intense amusement park ride. Dr. Tinvar stared at the displays showing Jake's return trajectory with something approaching awe. His flight path is even more complex than his approach route, he observed. He's compensating for increased mass, passenger safety requirements, and changing gravitational conditions simultaneously. And he's doing it all manually, Commander Relix added, his military experience allowing him to appreciate the skill required for such precision under pressure. No computer assistance, no automated navigation, just biological neural pathways, processing multidimensional force relationships in real time. The academic team watched in stunned silence as Jake's shuttle emerged from the pulsar's gravitational field with all 47 rescued researchers alive and unharmed. The maneuver that had seemed impossible when proposed with crude sketches on paper had been executed flawlessly by a human Deathworlder, who treated gravitational forces that could destroy starships as minor inconveniences to be surfed through rather than calculated around. Kepler 7. This is rescue shuttle returning with all passengers safe and accounted for, Jake's voice announced with obvious satisfaction. Request permission to dock and transfer the evacuees to medical for standard post-trauma evaluation. The medical bay of Galactic Academic Station Kepler 7 filled with rescued researchers representing 12 different species, all of whom had survived an experience that should have killed them thanks to the intuitive physics of a human who had learned to read force patterns by growing up on a world trying to kill him every day, but the real transformation occurred in the days following the rescue. Word of Jake's success spread throughout the galactic academic community, not just as a story of heroic rescue, but as a demonstration of fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving that challenged basic assumptions about intelligence and capability. Professor Zethkara found herself restructuring her entire curriculum to include what she began calling applied survival intelligence, the kind of practical problem-solving that Deathworld species develop naturally. Her advanced xenobiology class now included case studies in adaptive reasoning and pattern recognition that drew heavily on Jake's approaches to complex problems. Dr. Quell began incorporating human-style, intuitive mathematics into her theoretical physics courses, teaching students to feel mathematical relationships rather than simply calculating them. Her most successful students learned to combine computational precision with the kind of spatial reasoning that Jake demonstrated naturally. The Threx Collective, initially terrified of the human predator, discovered that Jake was surprisingly easy to work with once they understood that his direct communication style wasn't aggressive posturing but simply efficient information exchange. Their distributed intelligence networks began incorporating human-style approximation and rapid decision-making protocols. Even the Luminari students, who had initially dimmed their natural glow to hide from what they perceived as a dangerous predator, found themselves drawn to Jake's straightforward approach to complex problems. Lyra, who had become his study partner and friend, began teaching other students how to think beyond their species, accumulated databases and develop original analytical capabilities. The final scene of Jake's first semester at Galactic Academic Station Kepler 7 showed him during lunch break in the student commons, casually arm wrestling with Clix, a young Threx who had discovered that humans were actually